I'm Ryan. Welcome back to the Sleep Story Collective. It's really good to have you here tonight. Wherever you're listening from, whether you're already tucked beneath the covers, resting into your pillow, curled into a blanket, or simply trying to soften the edges of a long day, I'm very glad you made it here. At the Sleep Story Collective, we only have one mission: to help you unwind, to help everything in you soften, to help you ease quietly and gently into sleep. So for the next little while, there is nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to complete, no task waiting for your attention, no message you need to answer tonight, no conversation you need to replay, no thought you need to force into order before morning. Everything can wait. Let your shoulders drop a little now. Let your jaw loosen. Let the space around your eyes become quiet. And if it feels comfortable, allow your breathing to settle into an easier rhythm. A gentle inhale, a slower exhale, and then another. You do not need to clear your mind. You do not need to do this perfectly. You do not need to make yourself calm all at once. You only need to listen. And even that can grow softer as the story carries you. Let each sentence arrive gently. Let each pause open a little more space. Let your thoughts move in the background if they want to. Nothing here is in a hurry. Nothing here needs to be chased. Tonight, I'd like to take you somewhere quiet, somewhere high and soft and full of careful air. A place of curved beams and moonlit mesh, of warm lanterns, of feathers settling, of wings no longer expected to do too much, of perches placed low for comfort, of shallow water reflecting the stars, of a caretaker who speaks softly and understands that some kinds of healing begin not with effort, but with rest. This is not a place of spectacle, not a place of noise, not a place where anything performs for you. It is gentler than that. It is a place built around recovery already in progress. A place where small living things are allowed to stop striving for a while. A place where damaged wings are not treated like failures. A place where slowness is ordinary. A place where quiet is a form of care. So if you are still carrying some of the day with you, that is all right. If your mind is a little active, that is all right too. You do not need to arrive here already serene. The story is not waiting for you to be perfect. It will simply walk beside you for a while, slowly, quietly, until the ground beneath your thoughts feels softer. And now, tonight's story is called The Aviary, Where Injured Wings Learn to Rest. You do not exactly remember deciding to come here. Not in the ordinary sense. There is no ticket in your pocket, No address committed to memory. No brightly lit entrance on a main road. It feels instead as though the path revealed itself when the evening had grown quiet enough for you to notice it. The road you had been following narrowed without warning. Street lamps became fewer. The sound of traffic thinned into something distant and harmless. A line of trees opened just enough to reveal a path of pale stone dust bordered by low lanterns hooded in dark metal. Their light was warm and small, only bright enough to mark the curve of the way ahead. The moment you stepped onto that path, the air changed. It was cooler there. Not cold, only touched by shade and leaves and the damp softness that gathers where plants have been watered late in the day. Beneath that coolness was another scent, clean wood, moss, a trace of wild grass, and something else, very faint, feathers perhaps. Sun-warmed straw now losing its heat to the night. The kind of scent you do not notice in one sharp moment, but slowly, as though it had been waiting at the edge of your awareness. Ahead, through the trees, the structure appeared. At first it seemed almost unreal in the moonlight. Not a heavy building, not enclosed in the ordinary way. Instead, great curved wooden beams rose in graceful arcs and disappeared into fine silver mesh stretched high overhead. The mesh caught the light of the moon and the lanterns in such a delicate way that the whole structure seemed to shimmer rather than stand. It was large but not imposing, open but protected, an aviary. You stopped before the entrance without meaning to. It felt natural to pause there. The archway was broad and simple. No signs, no bright lettering. Only a timber frame and a lantern hung low on one side, its glow resting in a circle on the ground. Beyond it, the interior of the aviary was all layered shadow and warm points of light. You listened. At first there was almost no sound at all. Then, softly, a flutter, a rustle of feathers, the faintest brush of claws against wood, a settling, then stillness again. You can take your time. The voice came from a little way to your left, calm, even, close enough to feel present but not intrusive. You turned and saw the caretaker. They stood near the entrance with one hand resting lightly on the rail of a low fence. Their coat was simple and dark. Their boots were worn at the edges. A small lamp behind them left their expression clear but gentle. Not overly cheerful, not solemn, just kind. The sort of face that made room instead of taking it. They introduced themselves as Elion. Their voice had the softened cadence of someone accustomed to speaking around resting creatures. No word was wasted. No movement was hurried. They told you there was no route to follow unless you wanted one. No sequence you had to complete. Only paths. Only places to stop. Only a way of moving through the aviary slowly enough to let it reveal itself. You don't need to see everything, they said. Most people rest better when they stop trying to finish places. There was the hint of something light in the way they said it. Not a joke exactly, more a small glimmer of dry warmth. Enough to make them feel real. Enough to reassure you without turning the mood bright. You smiled a little. It was true. Even quiet places are often hurried through. This one already seemed to resist that. Elion stepped inside, not ahead of you in a way that required following, but alongside you, allowing your pace to set itself naturally. The path underfoot changed from stone dust to smooth timber planks. Lanterns hung from low posts at intervals, each wrapped in frosted glass that turned their light amber and soft. Nothing in the aviary glared, nothing called out. The light seemed arranged less to illuminate everything than to reassure the eye that it did not need to strain. The first birds you noticed were on the lower perches. Small birds, some finch-like, some broader in the chest, some with long tails gathered nesting beneath them. The perches had been placed close to the ground and surrounded by climbing plants, so the birds resting there felt less displayed than sheltered. A fugid with one wing held a little differently from the other. One perched with a slight scented in its braceful. Another stood on one foot, the other tucked carefully and without drama. Nothing about them suggested distress, only accommodation, adjustment, life continuing with gentleness around its limits. One little bird shifted and made the tiniest sound of feathers brushing together. Then it settled again, chest rising and falling almost imperceptibly. Another tucked its head deeper into the curve of its own back. The stillness here was not empty. It was full of minute decisions toward comfort. The path of a claw moving a fraction on wood. A tail feather easing into place. A quiet breath. You found yourself lowering your own movements in response, not because anyone asked you to, because the place invited it. Elian said softly, "The lower perches are for those who don't need height to feel themselves." You looked at the birds again. Some of them, perhaps, had once been creatures made for long arcs of effortless sky. Now they rested near the ground, among leaves and gentle light. And yet there was no sadness pressed upon the scene, only a deep practicality. Here is what helps. Here is what soothes. Here is what no longer needs to be forced. You moved on slowly. The path widened and curved toward the heart of the aviary, where the beams rose higher and the canopy overhead seemed to disappear into darkness and silver mesh. Here the sound changed. Not louder, only broader. You could hear wing beats now from farther off. Not many, not frantic. Just the sound of birds moving when movement felt possible. A soft lift, a brief glide, a landing somewhere above in the branches and beams. A bird crossed the space overhead. Its wings opened and caught the warm air of the enclosure in one unhurried sweep. It did not fly high or long. It simply glided from one perch to another, settled, and remained there. The movement had no showmanship in it, no display of strength. It was beautiful precisely because it was modest. A little distance traveled, a little trust placed in air. Enough. Elian stopped near a wide branch anchored between two support beams and glanced up. There was a time, they said quietly, when I thought healing would look dramatic. You waited. Their tone suggested the rest would come only if the silence welcomed it. It rarely does, they said at last. Usually it looks like this. They nodded toward the bird above. A short flight, a good landing, a calmer breath after. The sentence settled in the air around you. There was something restful about being in a place where improvement was not celebrated loudly, where small progress was enough, where nothing was expected to become impressive in order to be worthwhile. Beyond the high central space, the path led through an area of suspended branches, arranged at different heights with trailing vines and pockets of leaves tucked around them. This section felt almost like a slow forest held indoors. Moonlight filtered through the mesh roof overhead, turning some leaves silver while leaving others in soft shadow. A small pale bird moved along a branch with measured steps, pausing often, not from fear, but from care. Every few steps it would stop, balance, breathe, and continue. You watched it until it disappeared behind a curtain of leaves. Near the edge of this little suspended grove sat a wide bench of smooth wood, curved enough to support the body without asking anything from it. Elian suggested you sit for a moment, so you did. The bench held a little warmth, as though it had stored the day and was giving it back slowly to the night. From here, you could see birds at 3 levels at once. Low on the sheltered perches, midway through the leafy branches, high above on broader rails near the beams. Each group moved differently. The lower birds mostly rested. The mid-level birds shifted and resettled. The higher ones seemed to prefer stillness, with occasional brief glides to a neighboring post. It was not rewarding, only varied, each one finding the distance from ground and effort that suited its own kind of recovery. You stayed there longer than you expected. The aviary rewarded staying. A bird you had first mistaken for motionless lifted one foot and tucked it more securely into its feathers. Another, hidden among leaves, produced a soft single chirr. Not a call exactly, more a small private sound. and was answered from somewhere farther back with a quieter one. The exchange was so subtle it might have been imagined. Then nothing. Only air. Only lantern light. Only the patience of branches. When you rose, the path took you toward water. Not a large pool, not an ornamental one. A long, shallow basin bordered by stone and planted reeds, arranged so that birds who preferred walking or wading could approach without strain. At one end, water slipped from a narrow card in a gentle, continuous thread, quiet enough to soothe without drawing focus. The surface reflected the lanterns and the silver mesh above in broken, wavering lines. A white bird stood near the edge, on long, thin legs, its reflection nearly as still as its body. One wing sat a little lower than the other, held comfortably rather than corrected. It lowered its beak to the water once. Small ripples widened. A second bird, farther along, stepped into the shallows and stood there without drinking, simply enjoying the coolness around its feet. Nothing in the scene felt staged, only allowed. Allowed to rest, allowed to pause, allowed not to perform recovery for anyone watching. This part helps the ones who carry tension in the body, Alien said. The water changes the way they stand. You looked more closely. The birds near the basin did seem different somehow. Not more active, only less held against themselves. The water invited a slight release, a softening through the legs, the chest, the neck. It made you think of how a person might feel stepping into warm water after holding themselves upright all day. A low stone wall ran beside the basin, and you sat there for a while. The stone was cool and grounded beneath you. The thread of falling water created a sound as fine as silk being drawn slowly through fingers. Somewhere above, a bird crossed from one branch to another with 2 easy wing beats. Then, stillness again. It was remarkable how little needed to happen here before calm deepened. Alien sat a little distance away, leaving enough space for the quiet to belong to both of you, without becoming a conversation you had to maintain. After a while they said, "People often think rest begins when the body stops." They watched the water as they spoke. But sometimes it begins when the body realizes it no longer has to prove anything. The words were not delivered like wisdom meant to impress, only as something long observed, something the birds had taught this place, slowly, over time. From the basin, the path wound into a warmer part of the aviary, where the mesh roof was draped more thickly with climbing plants, holding in gentle heat. This section smelled faintly of seed, leaves, and clean straw. Here were the sheltered nooks, small alcoves built into the curve of the enclosure with low entrances, padded flooring, and wide perches wrapped in soft material for birds who needed extra steadiness. Some alcoves held a single bird, some held pairs. Most were dimly lit with blue shaded lamps that made the spaces feel like evening tucked inside evening.
One little bird, with a streaked chest, sat in an alcove entrance, eyes half closed, chest feathers fluffed against the warmth. Its injured wing was folded close and supported by its own position, as if it had discovered exactly the angle that cost it the least effort. Another bird, further in, slept with its beak resting against the wrapped perch, so fully at ease that it seemed carved from quiet itself. A soft movement in straw, a breath, a tiny shiver through feathers as some dream passed and went. Alien explained that some birds recovered from breaks, some from storms, some from collisions with bright windows or wires they could not have understood. Some were not truly injured at all, only too depleted to continue without rest. The wing isn't always the deepest hurt, they said. Sometimes it's simply where the strain finally shows. You nodded, because the sentence seemed to extend beyond birds without forcing itself to do so. The path narrowed again and led through a section of hanging plants where the lanterns were spaced further apart. This was not darkness exactly, only less light. The leaves overhead shifted slightly in the moving night air, and their shadows travelled slowly over the timber path. The aviary trusted dimness more the deeper you went into it. Nothing here seemed afraid of quiet corners. That trust itself was calming. At the end of this dimmer path was a circular room not fully enclosed but deeply sheltered, with walls of slatted wood and a roof open at the centre to the silver mesh sky above. In the middle stood a great branch structure, shaped like a tree without leaves, wide enough to hold dozens of resting birds at different heights. Many of them were already asleep, heads tucked, feathers slightly lifted for warmth, bodies so still that at first they looked like ornaments placed there deliberately. Then one adjusted a foot, another gave a single soft, breath-like rustle. They were alive, simply far from urgency. This seemed to be the quiet centre of the aviary. Not a place where much happened, a place where less and less happened well.
Around the edges of the circular room were low seats cushioned in dark fabric, and Elian invited you to choose one if you wished. You sat. From here, the branch structure rose in layered silhouettes against the faint moonlit opening above, and the sleeping birds arranged across it looked almost like blossoms formed from shadow and feather. You could hear more here because there was less to distract from it. A minute movement of claws against bark, the tiniest scrape of beak over feather during a final adjustment, a soft settling sigh from somewhere high above, the air itself moving through the open roof with just enough force to stir a loose feather caught in a branch. Then the feather drifting down in no hurry at all. Elian did not speak for a long while. The silence between you was not empty. It was the sort that arrives when words would only make things smaller. After some time, they said, almost to themselves, "This is the room where most people stop expecting the story to go somewhere." There was that trace of warmth again, not bland, Not bright, just human. You understood what they meant. There is relief in a place that does not promise escalation, a place that deepens instead of intensifies. You sat there until the ordinary markers of time began to loosen. There was no clock, no announcement, no clear sequence of events to track. Only the gradual darkening of the plants beyond the slatted walls, the softening of lantern light as your eyes adjusted further, the feeling of your own body growing more willing to rest into the chair without holding itself ready. One bird lifted its head briefly, opened one eye into the dimness, then tucked itself back into sleep. That tiny act seemed enough to fill several minutes. Eventually, Elian rose and motioned gently that there was more if you wanted it. You followed them out of the circular room and along a quieter corridor of the aviary, where the path sloped almost imperceptibly downward. Here, the walls were lined with woven reed screens that filtered the lantern light and let moving shadows pass through in softened shapes. The air was cooler again, a little fresher. At the end of this corridor, the aviary opened into what felt like a moon garden for birds. Low shrubs with pale leaves grew in wide, curved beds. White flowers that opened only at night gave off the faintest clean sweetness. Flat stones held the day's warmth in their cores and released it slowly into the air. Birds who preferred the ground or very low flight moved here with a kind of quiet dignity. A dove paced slowly through the pale leaves. A small dark bird perched on a rounded stone with one wing held carefully near its side. Another, broader and speckled, slept in the shelter of a shrub as though the night had folded a pocket around it. The moonlight falling through the mesh above made this part of the aviary feel almost open to the sky. The lanterns were fewer here, and much of the illumination came from above, thin and silver, enough to edge the leaves and the birds in quiet light. He walked more slowly without deciding to. Everything in this moon garden seemed arranged for the lowering of stimulation. No height, no crossings overhead, no water sound. Only breath, leaf, stone, feather, and the softness of pale plants. Elian explained that some birds recovered best not from encouragement, but from the absence of demand. They don't need coaxing, they said. They need a world that asks less of them for a while. The phrase stayed with you. A world that asks less. How many people, you wondered, would know how to rest if given exactly that? At one edge of the moon garden stood a little warming house with its doors open to the night. It was not a house in the domestic sense, more like a deep sheltered bay built of cedar and lined with softly heated stones. Inside, a few birds slept in deeper warmth, their bodies turned toward the residual heat beneath them. One larger bird with rust-colored feathers slept standing on a low, padded rail, with its head tucked into its own shoulder so completely that its outline seemed softened into a single shape. Another rested on the floor of the shelter, beside a basket of dry grasses, wings folded in a way that suggested long familiarity with conserving effort. You stood at the threshold and let the warm air touch your face. The smell here was different again. Cedar, warm stone, dry grass. A trace of clean dust lifted by feathers and then settled again. Nothing dramatic had happened in the aviary since you entered, and yet the calm had continued to deepen through these changes in air, scent, sound, and height. It was as though the place knew how to lead the nervous system down one level at a time without making a performance of doing so. Elion looked back toward the path you had taken and said, "The first part is usually curiosity." You listened. The middle is where most people stop trying to understand everything. They let the sentence rest. The last part, they said, is where they remember they are allowed to be tired. The words felt gentle rather than exposing. There was no judgment in them, only permission. From the warming house, the path curved back upward through a long covered walkway where hanging moss and thin trailing plants softened the supports and absorbed sound. No birds perched here, no features asked to be noticed. It was simply a transition, a stretch of path designed for less. Your steps sounded softer now than when you had first entered, or perhaps you had grown quieter in your walking. A drop of condensed water fell from a leaf somewhere ahead and landed on wood with a sound so small it disappeared almost at once. Then your breathing, then nothing. By the time the walkway opened again, the aviary seemed even more settled than before. Fewer wing beats, longer silences. The birds themselves had not vanished. They had only grown more committed to stillness. You emerged into a final broad space beneath the highest beams, where the lanterns had been shaded with blue glass. The light here was cooler, not bright blue, only the faintest shift from amber into marine dusk. It softened the wood, the mesh, the leaves, and the contours of the resting birds in a way that made everything feel one step closer to dream. "This is the late room," Elion said very quietly. "Not officially, that's just what I call it." There was the smallest glimmer of that private humor again. It's where the aviary stops expecting even itself to stay awake. You almost smiled at the phrase. It was exactly right. The whole place now seemed to be leaning towards sleep, not collapsing into it, only leaning, allowing, trusting. In the late room, perches were broader and lower than in the central spaces. Soft wraps covered sections of wood where claws might rest more easily. Plants here were darker, leafier, and less reflective. Birds who had perhaps managed a little flight earlier now seemed content simply to remain where they were. One bird lifted its wings very slightly, as though testing the air around its body, then let them settle again. Another adjusted its feet once and became still for so long that you forgot to look for movement. A wide, chaise-like bench had been placed near one side of the room, angled toward the broadest span of blue-shaded space. Elion suggested you rest there if you liked. You did. The bench was more comfortable than you expected, its curves supporting the back and legs in a way that did not ask the body to remain alert. From this angle, you could see the beams above, the mesh roof carrying moonlight, and the lines of perches holding birds in varying degrees of sleep. Nothing moved quickly enough to demand focus. This felt important. In the late room, you no longer had to watch. You could simply be in the presence of things that had already slowed. Elion sat a little way off on a low stool, not facing you directly, not turning away either. The arrangement itself was a kind of kindness, nearby without pressure, present without management. After a while, they said, "People sometimes apologize for being tired." The sentence hung gently in the blue air, as if it were a moral failure. They looked up toward a bird sleeping on the nearest wrapped perch. I've never seen a bird apologize for needing rest. There was such plain truth in that you laughed softly under your breath, though the sound barely left your chest. Elion smiled, not triumphantly, just in recognition. The longer you lay there, the more your attention broadened and softened. Instead of following any one bird, you began to sense the room as a whole, the collective hush of many small bodies at rest, the air warmed and cooled by hidden systems designed to comfort without announcing themselves, the occasional almost sound of a feather lifting and falling, the blue glass lamps holding everything in lowered light. No single part dominated. The calm lived in the arrangement, in the whole. You thought then of all the forms a wing might take. A literal wing with feathers, bone, muscle, and memory of air. A shoulder held too tightly through too many days. A mind that keeps preparing for collisions that are not happening now. A body that has learned to brace even in safety. Here, in this aviary, wings were not symbols or lessons. They were simply themselves. And yet being among them made something in you unfasten. Not all at once. Only enough. Enough to notice. Enough to let the body trust the bench a little more. Enough to let the next exhale go further. At some point, a bird from a nearby perch made a small journey. It opened its wings halfway, gave 2 gentle beats, crossed a short gap, and landed on a lower branch wrapped in soft cloth. There it stood for a moment, balancing. Then it tucked its head and became still. That small movement held the whole promise of the aviary. Not achievement, not return to full strength, simply choosing the place where rest would come more easily. Elian spoke less and less as the late room deepened. This seemed wise. There comes a point in a gentle night where even helpful words are more than necessary. Still, after a long quiet, they said one final thing. Nothing in here is behind. Their voice was barely above the softened air. Everything is simply where it is in the resting. You did not answer. There was nothing to improve in the sentence. The aviary now felt less like a place you had entered and more like a climate your body had adapted to. The warm and cool layers of air, the blue lanterns, the lowered sound, the deliberate softness of everything that touched claw, wing, foot, perch, water, eye. Even your own thoughts seemed to have changed materials. Less sharp, less metallic, more like cloth, more like feathers, passing over things instead of striking them. You lay there long enough for the idea of time to loosen completely. A bird breathed, a lantern held. Moonlight shifted by so little you could not say whether it had changed or whether your eyes had. The bench beneath you became more and more trustworthy. Your hands loosened. Your shoulders widened into stillness. Your face forgot its daytime expressions. The aviary asked for nothing, and because it asked for nothing, it gave so much. At length, Elian rose. Not suddenly, not because the moment had broken, only because the night had reached that tender point where leaving could happen without tearing the calm. They came near enough to be heard easily and said, "We'll leave them to the deeper part of their rest now." The sentence felt right. Not an ending, a continuation from which you were gently excusing yourself. You sat up slowly. No sharp return. No sense of having to reassemble yourself quickly. The late room remained blue and soft behind you as you stood. One bird on a nearby perch opened one eye very briefly and closed it again, unconcerned by your movement. The calm of the aviary did not depend on your stillness. That too was restful. You were not responsible for holding the peace together. The return path took you back not through every earlier space, but past their edges, allowing glimpses rather than full revisits. The moon garden lay pale and quiet to one side. A speckled bird still slept beneath the shrub where you had seen it before. The covered walkway held its hanging moss and dimness. The warming house gave off its cedar breath. In the distance, the basin reflected lanterns broken into soft lines. Everything remained. Nothing had rushed ahead in your absence. As you walked, the aviary seemed to recede not in importance, but in detail. You no longer needed the close descriptions. You no longer needed to remember which bird perched where. The place had already done its work more deeply than memory required. It had shown your system what less could feel like, what a world asking less might do, what it means to be surrounded by living things that do not apologize for recovery. Near the entrance, Elion stopped beside the lantern that had first greeted you. Its amber light still rested in a small circle on the ground. Beyond it, the path back through the trees waited quietly, no more demanding than when you had arrived. Elion rested a hand on the timber frame and looked back into the aviary once, almost affectionately. Then they turned to you. "There's no need to remember all of it," they said. The sentence echoed in its way the sanctuary and all such places of quiet care. These places don't really work by being remembered perfectly. Their words held that small private warmth. They work by leaving your breathing different when you go. You stood with that for a moment, because what words eyes already. Something had changed, not in a dramatic way, in a usable way, in a bodily way. The breath had gone lower. The thoughts had lowered their volume. The skin no longer felt so close to the world. Then, with the lightest trace of a smile, Elion added, "And yes, before you wonder, you can come back." There it was again, kind but not bland. That exact balance of quiet presence and subtle humanity that had made the whole evening feel guided rather than managed. You smiled. It felt good to be understood before needing to ask. You thanked them properly, not with the hurried politeness of habit, but with the fuller gratitude reserved for places that have met a need you had not known how to describe. For the lanterns, for the lower perches, for the basin, for the moon garden, for the blue late room, for the birds who had shown what resting without apology looked like, for the care arranged so precisely around fragility. Elion inclined their head and said, "That's what this place is for." Simple words, solid words, enough. You stepped back through the archway and onto the lantern-lined path. The cool air of the trees met you gently. Behind you, the aviary remained softly lit and almost silent. A faint flutter reached you once from within. Then, only the quiet of the path. As you walked away, the mesh roof caught the moon one last time between the branches and disappeared. The return did not feel abrupt. That was part of the aviary's kindness. It had prepared even the leaving. By the time more ordinary sounds began to re-enter the night, they felt softened. A distant road, a late passing car, the low hum of the wider world going on. But these sounds no longer sat sharply against you. The quiet of the aviary had traveled with you somehow, settling between your thoughts and the world like another layer of air. You carried small images with you, the low perches among leaves, the white bird at the basin, the sleeping birds on the central branch structure, the pale night flowers in the moon garden, the warming stones, the blue lanterns of the late room. That small journey from one perch to another, Elian's voice saying, "Nothing here needs to be fixed tonight, only rested." And perhaps you carried something less visible too, a memory in the body of what it feels like to stop insisting, to stop treating tiredness as a problem to defeat, to stop measuring worth by output and height and distance, to understand that a lowered perch can still be a place of dignity, that a short flight can still be a beautiful one, that rest is not the opposite of life. It is one of the ways life continues kindly. By the time you reached the road you knew, the aviary was gone from sight, and yet it did not feel lost. It felt near in another form, as though somewhere inside you now there existed a curved, quiet place of wood and mesh and blue lanterns, where injured wings were not hidden, not pitied, not driven onward, only given exactly what helped them settle. A place you might remember not as a map, but as a bodily softness. A place you could return to when the day had asked too much. And now, as this story begins to come gently to its close, you do not need to close it any farther. You do not need to hold every image. You do not need to remember every turn in the path. You can simply rest. Simply let the aviary remain where it is, softly lit, high and quiet, protected from harshness, open in the night. Let the entrance arch stand gently in your mind. The timber frame, the amber lantern, the first sound of feathers settling somewhere beyond the threshold. A small flutter, a breath, a shift, a creature arranging itself for comfort. Let yourself remember the lower perches, the lufferding tucked into themselves among leaves, the tiny adjustments that meant more than display every could. The peace of seeing recovery held low to the ground without shame. The peace of seeing rest treated as ordinary. Let yourself remember the high open space, the bondness rising overhead, the soft curve of wings catching air for only as long as needed. A short bed, a gentle landing, a calmer breath after. Nothing dramatic, nothing forced, only enough. Let yourself remember the basin, still water, a bird lowering its bed wince of rippelos bodily going and fading. The quiet thread of your words back of four exact a silk soft. The words recovery from water, how to soft holding its words, so comforting. Let yourself remember the sheltered oath of wrapped perches, warm pockets of books, light. Birds at what words of worth benefits the words of them. No thoughts, only passing kindness around thoughts, around words. Let yourself remember the circular world, the bonding back with words of a lipsless story. Sleeping birds clustered across it like small, dark blossoms. A feather drifting slowly through the air. The feeling that not every story needs to go somewhere louder. Some stories deepen, some stories lower, some stories simply make space for sleep. Let yourself remember the moon garden, pale leaves, night blooming flowers, the broad quiet of ground level rest, the understanding that some living things heal best not from urging, but from a world that asks less. Let that thought stay near you now. A world that asks less. For this little while, let that be true of the world around you too. Let yourself remember the late room, the blue lanterns, the broader perches, the softened outlines of birds who had already chosen stillness, the bench holding your weight, the air itself seeming to grow quieter, the feeling that nothing more was required of anyone there. Not height, not speed, not recovery on a schedule, only rest in its own time. If you are still awake, that is all right. There is nothing wrong with resting quietly. Sleep often comes most gently when it is no longer being watched for. So there is no need to chase it, no need to measure how close it is, no need to ask whether you are doing this well. You are here. You are resting. That is enough. Let your breathing remain easy. Let your jaw stay loose. Let the shoulders sink farther. Let the bed or chair or pillow hold more of your weight. Let the mind become like the aviary itself, curved, lantern-lit, protected, asking less, holding quiet life without needing to explain it. If thoughts appear, let them pass like small birds shifting once on a perch before settling again. No need to follow them through the mesh roof into the dark. No need to name them. No need to correct them. Just let them move a little. Then let stillness return. At the SleepStory Collective, we only have one mission: to help you unwind, to help everything in you soften, to help you ease quietly and gently into sleep. So tonight, let the aviary remain open in the quiet part of your mind. Let the lower perches stay warm among the leaves. Let the basin hold its reflections. Let the moon garden keep its pale flowers. Let the blue lanterns of the late room continue glowing softly overhead. Let every bird in that hidden place keep resting exactly as it needs to. And let yourself be one more living thing allowed to rest without apology. You do not need to earn this rest. You do not need to prove that you have worked hard enough to deserve it. You do not need to become better before you are allowed to be tired. Tonight, you are allowed to be held by quiet, allowed to be lowered gently out of effort, allowed to stop measuring yourself by what you can still carry through the dark, allowed simply to rest. And if sometime in the future the world feels too bright again, too fast, too sharp around the edges, perhaps you will remember that there is somewhere inside you now a high, soft place of wood and mesh and moonlight, a place where wings are not judged by distance, a place where healing is allowed to look modest, a place where small movements count, a place where the air is warm and the lanterns are low, and the night asks less of every creature inside it, a place you can return to. Thank you for spending this quiet night with me. Thank you for letting me keep you company. And wherever you are drifting now, I hope the rest of your night is peaceful. I hope your body feels heavier in the best way. I hope your thoughts grow softer and farther apart. And I hope that somewhere just ahead of you, sleep arrives kindly, like a bird choosing the lower perch at last. Good night. you.